All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing. City of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page or tune in to 900 AM or 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kevin, and good afternoon, everyone. We have several important updates today, both on the programmatic side and from our colleagues in the police department. First, I want to acknowledge up front the deep sense of frustration that many feel, both to understand why these shootings continue to happen and as leaders of the city, how to find innovative ways to find solutions that will put an end to this violence. But despite that frustration, we cannot and will not despair. We will continue to do everything in our power to address this issue. Our police department continues to do important work on the ground, responding to and investigating incidents to ensure people who are responsible for these senseless crimes are brought to justice. And they're taking so many guns off the street every day. But we implore everyone, especially our young people, please put down the guns before making dangerous split-second decisions that will shatter countless lives forever. As I said on Monday and many times before, we also need the public's help to solve crimes and ensure that those responsible for these heinous acts of violence face the consequences of their actions. We encourage any resident with information about crimes to report it anonymously to 215-686-TIPS. That's 215-686-TIPS. If you have information, you don't need to come forward publicly. You don't need to be on TV or to be named. You can simply provide your information anonymously, and we'll take it from there. Give us a lead so we can bring people to justice and get justice for those who have been killed and harmed. And as a reminder, the city is offering a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of someone who fires a weapon within 500 feet of a school, recreation center, or library. We hope that those with information about any crime will come forward so we can get the perpetrators off the street for a long time. Before I turn it over to Eric Atwood, Senior Director of Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety, I want to take a moment to address these briefings moving forward. We are committed to providing updates to the press and public around everything the city continues to do to confront this epidemic. Since our first bi-weekly violence briefing in March 2021, we've held at least 35 of these briefings. Over time, we would listen to feedback from both the press and public and are looking forward to transitioning from these virtual format to an in-person format, but all on a monthly basis. This is scheduled to begin on Wednesday, October 12th, and more details will be issued as we get closer to October 12th. As we remain committed to providing regular updates, the administration and the police department have and will continue to host additional press opportunities as needed on particular issues or as events arise. Now, for more updates from our Office of Criminal Justice and Public Safety, I'd like to turn it over to Erica Atwood. Erica?
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. Just really quickly, our cluster, Criminal Justice and Public Safety, is wrapping up the summer leg of our community listening tour. During this stretch of our community meetings, we really worked within our neighborhoods. We didn't reach during our spring segment of the Roadmap Listening Tour. We are spending this time reconnecting with community, sharing the feedback we've gotten from our first series of meetings and hearing from our new neighbors that are participating. We have our final meeting for this leg of the series tomorrow, Thursday, September 15th from 6 to 8 at the Lighthouse Outdoor Facility at 199 East Erie Avenue. After this series, we will be resetting and continuing through the fall with our last kind of leg for this calendar year before the holidays begin. During these meetings, the Criminal Justice and Public Safety team and other agencies work in real time with community organizations and leaders and members to develop kind of actions with these community members that impact their safety, including addressing environmental issues and connecting trusted messengers with resources for their respective communities. Our office would really like to express the gratitude of all the Philadelphians who've made it out to our nearly 20 meetings across the city. We are committed to strengthening these authentic connections with our community members and making sure their voices are centered in our programming. We look forward to continuing to build towards solutions within our neighborhoods. And with that, I will hand it over to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Erica, and good afternoon, everyone. The crisis of gun violence this year has been, quite frankly, disgusting. And the incidents that have occurred this past week have shaken a lot of our police officers and community members to their core. From Friday night until Monday, there were 8 homicides, 8. Among those homicides was a city worker, Tiffany Fletcher, whom we spoke about at a press conference on Monday. In addition to Ms. Fletcher, there was also a 17-year-old girl by the name of Taryn Johnson who was murdered this weekend. A young girl who was out simply walking with a friend and her dog. We've been fortunate that we've received public assistance with several cases, including Ms. Fletcher's. However, we need the ongoing help of our community members to get the remainder of the offenders from that incident and other incidences into custody and continue to get dangerous people off the street. Tips can be submitted anonymously by calling or texting our tip line at 215-686-TIPS or 215-686-8477, or by filling out an anonymous form on our website at www.phillypolice.com. Please bear in mind that all homicides have a standing $20,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. And as in Tiffany Fletcher's case, any shooting that occurs near a recreation center has a standing additional $10,000 reward. In addition to these tragic incidents, an unimaginable amount of non-fatal shootings have also occurred. It's both tragic and fortunate at the same time that we have trauma centers that are equipped and experienced in handling these incidents and are able to save so many lives. But these shootings, they have lifelong impacts on the individuals who directly experience them. In addition to their immediate family members and their friends, community members, medical personnel, and officers are also indirectly impacted by these incidences, and they also experience the trauma that occurs during these shootings. But in light of all of that, we're still out here making arrests. For example, just last evening around 6:30, Central Division officers responded to a report of a shooting incident at the Fashion District on 900 Market Street. Initial investigation shows that 2 small groups of teenage males were fighting inside the mall when one suddenly produced a gun and opened fire. This male dropped the magazine to his gun and then fled the mall on foot. Mall security immediately locked down the mall and, along with police, quickly and safely cleared the building. Security quickly passed on video from that incident to police showing the alleged shooter, and then flash information was relayed over police radio. A short time later, a male who matched the description of the shooter was stopped in the 200 block of North 10th Street, and based on our ongoing investigation, is now expected to face charges. This is just one of the several arrests made in the last 2 weeks, and Chief Inspector Venor will highlight more a little bit later on. But I want to stress that no one, absolutely no one, gets to walk away from this and only be tangentially affected by what's been going on. These shootings are affecting our community members, your family, my family, your sons, your daughters, your parents, everyone. And we are doing everything possible to get ahead of this crisis. But I can't stress this enough. We still need the public's help in solving these cases. Before I turn this over to DC Joel Dales, who's our Deputy Commissioner of Patrol, and he's going to be providing updates on our pinpoint grids, and then he'll be followed by Chief Inspector Frank Venor, who's the Chief of Detectives. I want to mention that the Philadelphia Police Department is currently accepting applications for the position of police officer recruit. I made no secret about our need to have more officers on the street, and so far, we've been able to redeploy officers to areas that need additional help. In fact, this coming weekend, all officers assigned to patrol operations will have their tours extended by 4 hours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. This extension is to provide an increase in officer availability in order to bolster the department's crime-fighting efforts. But as I've said time and time again, this isn't sustainable long-term. We simply need new officers to join our ranks. And so I'm pleased to announce that this upcoming Friday, September 16th, the PPD will be graduating 72 new Philadelphia police officers ready to serve their communities. And by the end of this year, we're expecting to have an additional 42 officers graduate and hit the streets as well. I know that the PPD and the community is looking forward to having more boots on the ground, but there's still so much more that needs to be done. To those listening, please consider a career as a Philadelphia police officer. We're currently accepting applications until September 30th. So if you want to answer the call for service and be the difference in your community, Please go to www.joinphillypd.com for more information and to fill out an application, or call 215-685-COPS or 215-685-2677 to speak to a recruiter. Now with that, I will turn that over to Deputy Commissioner Joe Dales, who will talk about what we've been seeing in our pinpoint grids over this last period. DC Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you pull up the slides, please? Okay, next slide. Okay, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart, year to date as of September 11th, Philadelphia had 384 homicides and 1,687 shooting victims. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 4%, 384 this year versus 368 last year. And shooting victims are also up 5%, 1,687 this year versus 1,602 last year. As of yesterday, homicides are up 3%, so it went down slightly by 1%. And the shooting victim stats remain the same at 5%. Looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides. And again, the top three are arguments, drugs, and domestic. And the clearance rate is currently at 43%. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the 28-day comparison for shooting victims and homicides citywide. The blue bars represent the previous 28-day period from July 18th to August 14th, and the orange bars represent the current 28-day period from August 15th to September 11th. Looking at the left of the chart, it shows shooting victims up 28% citywide, 218 versus 170. And looking at the right side of the chart, it shows homicides down 15%, 40 versus 47. Next slide. Okay, this slide shows the homicide stats in the pinpoint grids. The orange bars represent homicides in 2021, and the gray line represents homicides in 2022. Year to date, as of September 11th, the chart shows homicides up 1%, 150 this year versus 148 last year in our pinpoint grids. Next slide, please. This slide shows the shooting victim stats in the pinpoint grids. The yellow bars represent shooting victims in 2021, and the blue line represents shooting victims in 2022. Year to date, as of September 11th, the chart shows shooting victims down 4% in the pinpoint grids. In comparison to last year, from the week of January 24th through the week of September 12th of this year, the chart shows a continuous decline in shooting victims. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, as of September 12th, 4,335 crime guns were recovered in our city. By the end of last year, we reached an all-time high of 5,907 crime guns. If we continue at this pace in 2022, there's no doubt we will surpass the 2021 year in total, which was 5,907. Next slide, please. All right, lastly, in reference to the properly made firearms, which is also known as ghost guns that were recovered in our city, year to date, as of September 12th, we are now at 408. And with that, I will now turn it over to Chief Inspector Frank Venor, who is the Chief Inspector of the Detective Bureau, and he will speak about cases we wish to highlight. Deputy Commissioner Venor. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Dales. Just wanted to highlight some of the cases the Commissioner referred to, especially looking back at the weekend that we had. The homicide, as refers to homicide, during this last period between the last press conference, homicides made 9 arrests and had 3 arrest warrants. All of those arrests and arrest warrants will be detailed and put out by Public Affairs. So I'm going to highlight a few of those cases. The first case I'm going to highlight happened back on Saturday, September 10th, just after 2:15 p.m. in the afternoon in the 1900 block of Market on the trolley platform. Our investigation revealed that 64-year-old Kevin Fulton, our decedent in this case, was on the platform when he encounters a 33-year-old male who was walking the opposite direction. They became engaged in an argument. That argument turned physical at one point, and the defendant in this case pulled out a handgun, 9mm handgun, and fired several times, striking the decedent, who was later pronounced at the scene. That occurred on Saturday afternoon. We have to give a lot of credit to and a lot of thanks to our partners at SEPTA. Several days later, on Monday, the SEPTA camera operator for the police department was diligently watching the camera when they noticed an individual fitting the description of our defendant from the Saturday case. They immediately notified the homicide division along with their officers. That person was noticed at first in Dilworth Plaza. They could not find the person after about an hour and a half of searching. Later that morning at 8th and Market, as the operator kept diligently following the camera along, they noticed an individual fitting the flash information. That individual was investigated. That investigation yielded a 9mm handgun from the individual. He was taken into custody and charged with homicide and related offenses in reference to the case with Mr. Fulton. The next case I wanted to highlight, and we talked about it a few days ago at a press conference, but it really needs to be brought to light, the actions that occurred during this case and the help that we still need in this case. So it's back on Friday, September 9th. This occurred around 1:30 in the afternoon at the Mill Creek Rec Center. What we now know is that employee Tiffany Fletcher, who's working at the rec center, and we believe this, is caught in the crossfire of juveniles who are firing firearms at each other. During the course of this incident, as the shots rang out, a working Philadelphia police officer from the 16th District heard the shots, immediately responded to the gunfire, and was able to chase down and catch a 14-year-old individual who was captured. A gun was recovered after a search in the area of where that individual ran, and he was charged with murder and related offenses. Now, in this case, we also believe that there are two other individuals in the opposing party that are firing towards our defendant. Both of these individuals, we believe, and the homicide investigators believe, are juveniles also, and we need the public's help. So anyone who may have information, we're urging them to call 215-686-TIPS or 8477. Next two cases are also homicide cases. They're also from earlier this week, and we also need the public's help in both of these cases. The commissioner referred to the first one, and that happened on Sunday, September 11th, just before 9 p.m. in the 5300 block of Horrocks in Northeast Philadelphia. In this case, our decedent, Tyrone Johnson, 17-year-old female, and a friend go out to walk the friend's dog in the neighborhood. While they're walking the dog, what our investigation now shows is that a dark-colored Dodge Challenger appears to be following, or you may even call it stalking, the two females. It's going around the block. At one point or another, individual gets out, looks at the females, gets back in, and continues to follow them along. As the incident unfolds, what we now know is an individual gets out of the car, out of the passenger side of the car. So there is a driver in the vehicle also, walks over to the two females and appears to specifically target our decedent. He shoots her multiple times, and she was later pronounced. Today, our public affairs was provided video of this dark-colored Dodge Challenger, along with some video of our alleged perpetrator in this case. We are hoping that someone would recognize the person or recognize that vehicle and give our tip line a call or call the homicide division with that information. That'll be released later today from Public Affairs. The next case I want to talk about happened in the very early morning hours of Monday, just around 12:43 a.m. And this is Daniel Ruley, 37-year-old SEPTA conductor who was coming home from being out with his wife. What we know now from the investigation is he drops his wife off in front of their home. He then goes and parks his vehicle. What we know is there's a dark colored sedan with tinted windows parked out in front of his house. They see him go drop his wife off, watch him park. As soon as he comes back on foot, a black male, it appears to be medium built, wearing all black clothing, exits the car and fires at Mr. Rulli. And that vehicle then leaves the area at a high rate of speed. Mr. Rulli is found later on, and he is pronounced very short time after. In this case, we need a lot of help. We need to know if anyone may know anything about this case or who was involved to give our homicide unit or tip line a call. And remember, for all homicides, there's a $20,000 reward offered for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. As the commissioner said, the non-fatal shooting investigation group, they were very busy in this period also, but they did make 15 arrests and 7 arrest warrants were obtained by them during the course of this time. Just to highlight one that happened in the very early morning hours of Monday up in Northeast Philadelphia, just before 2 a.m., as a bar began to let out in the 9200 block of East Roosevelt Boulevard, a large fight ensued. A lot of this fight was captured on video. And during the course of this fight, an individual, 23-year-old, we now know, pulled out a gun and fired several times, striking an individual who was taken, a 30-year-old who was taken to the hospital in critical condition. As part of our investigation, that video was reviewed. Numerous witnesses were interviewed, and they developed a suspect very quickly by the name of Eddie Colon Concepcion. That individual was found yesterday by the shooting investigation group. He was arrested. A gun was recovered during the course of that investigation, and he's been charged with attempted murder and related offenses. I'm going to turn things back over to Kevin at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Inspector Venor, and to all of our speakers. We will now move to Q&A for members of the press. And we ask that outlets coordinate ahead of time and that one representative from each media outlet ask questions. Reporters are asked to limit their questions to 2 or fewer for this first round. And if we have time for a second round, we'll go around again. Armando is also available for Spanish interpretation as needed. And so if you'd like to ask a question, just please use the raise your hand feature and we'll go down the line. So with that, we'll start with Kristen Johansson of KYW. Kristen?
So my first question is for the commissioner. Just with this weekend coming up, I understand that now there's going to be 12-hour shifts instead of the 8-hour shifts. Can somebody go ahead and explain that and talk a little bit about why you decided for this weekend?
Sure. DC Dales?
Yes, good afternoon. So we are extending only patrol officers who will be working extended tours, not the support services units. They will be working from day 8 to 4 tours will be extended, 4 to 12 tours will be extended, and also last stop personnel will be coming in early. The reason being is because this past weekend was a very violent weekend. We had a lot of homicides and numerous shooting victims. So we want to make sure that we can definitely put things in place and make sure we have sufficient amount of personnel, because it's still somewhat in the vacation season. If you look at it that way, we're still short on staffing. So to ensure that we have sufficient personnel to continue to cover in our problematic areas, which we are making arrests, we are police officers actually pulling up and walking into gun violence in their presence, and which shows that they're where they're supposed to be. So we want to make sure that we can enhance that this upcoming weekend. And if necessary in the near future, we'll also use that as well. But we're also working on other strategies moving forward.
And Mayor, this question is for you. Why was there a decision to, you talk about it's a priority because the commissioner also called this disgusting, but yet we're now having less press conferences. Why was the decision made to make it 1 press conference a month?
We could easily do 2 press conferences a month if we do it because it's a large number of high level city officials that need to be assembled in a physical location, as opposed to being able to communicate transparently from their desk with the press and with the public. And we feel that we'll adjust as we see what happens going forward. But it's just easy. It's easier to assemble all these folks online or virtually than it is in an in-person setting.
Okay, and just kind of to comment off of that, for all of us, we would like more press conferences because we don't get much access. So I know on behalf of many of the journalists here that the more press conferences about gun violence, it's just such a priority, probably the better.
I would argue with you strenuously that you do get access at least twice a month. For the last 35 press conferences, we have other press conferences as things like Mill Creek, that tragedy arose. I think the press office is available to you whenever you need it. And I understand your protest, but we're going to see how this goes.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Next up, Kelly Rule of Fox 29. Kelly?
Good afternoon. Commissioner Outlaw, or whoever you think would be appropriate. We've been hearing from business owners that there have been ongoing issues with juveniles in Center City, specifically near the Fashion District, in the Fashion District, gathering, fighting. We were told that before last night's shooting, there was a large presence and there were some fights. We were also told that the officers that responded were already in the area. So I just wanted to see if you could speak to the challenges that you guys are having and then how you've been responding to them.
Yeah, and we've made arrests in a lot of those incidences. DC Dels, you want to talk more about that?
Sure. Yes, we definitely have increased our presence within the past few weeks downtown because we have noticed an increase of juveniles hanging out downtown. We'll be beefing up the districts. When this class come out, we will be sending more officers in Center City as well, due to the fact that we are seeing an increase in crime and issues in those zones. The other day, in reference to the shooting inside the mall, we have police officers in the mall along with security, and we have police officers on bike, foot, and in cars on the external portion of the mall. So we're going to continue to show a strong police presence in that area throughout the week as well as the weekends. And we're going to continue moving forward and continue to focus on the crime in the Center City area as well.
And Mayor Kenny, on that note, we noticed that a lot of the storefronts, they haven't been replaced. District Taco moved. Wawa used to be a 24-hour operation. They now close at 8 o'clock. Like I said, business owners we spoke to, sometimes they have to lock their doors because of the activity down there. Kind of what is being done to try to bring businesses back, and how do you when there's that kind of climate?
Well, there are 24 new restaurants that are opening in Center City over the next this month and next month. So there are some areas of industries that think that Center City is very attractive. Wawa is one of our big stores in our city, and we love that Wawa's here and that they sponsor the things that it do, like Wawa Welcome America. But there is also business decisions that are made based on how much money a particular place will earn. I know the Starbucks, for example, that closed at 10th and Chestnut. There's 2 Starbucks within a block of each other. And sometimes these are business decisions that are made based on the gross income or net income that the particular location provides. I don't know the details of their business models, but I do know that the police are there. Police are making arrests, and there needs to be some people need to be held accountable for their actions. And that's out of our hands, and that turns into the hands of the district attorney and what they decide to do with the people that we arrest, either for carrying a gun or for vandalizing a store or for shoplifting. We're doing our end of the job by making the arrest, and then it's up to the DA to charge and the courts to issue punishments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. We'll now go to Isabel Sanchez of Telemundo 62. Isabel.
Thanks, Kevin. Armando, bueno, te comentaba, sé que es un poquito repetitiva, pero me interesa en español. Entonces, la actualización acerca de lo más reciente en la investigación del tiroteo del día de ayer dentro del Fashion District. Y bueno, y eso es para la comisionada y el alcalde, dado que este ya es el segundo incidente de violencia armada en 2 semanas involucrando adolescentes cerca de este centro comercial, ¿qué podemos hacer con la juventud? ¿Cuál es su mensaje para la juventud en estos momentos? Gracias.
This is a question for both the mayor and the commissioner. This is in regards to the incident that took place at the Fashion District. And I know that this has just been covered, but this is for the benefit of the Spanish-speaking audience. This is the second incident that's been happening with adolescents in the area. What is the message that you have for people, families, and young people in the city?
Well, I would say know where your kids are, where they're going, and whether they have a gun in their possession or in your house. Again, I mean, I know times have changed, and you can't say, I remember the good old days. But if I got caught vandalizing a store or God forbid carrying a gun or even seeing a gun, my parents would have taken the necessary precautions to make sure it didn't happen again. And we're, again, as I said, and Commissioner can expand on this. We have heavy police presence in Center City. We do make arrests, and we do hope that these folks are prosecuted or punished appropriately. But I mean, some people need to know where their kids are during the day, and especially after 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night.
Is there an answer from Commissioner?
I was trying to get my camera back on. Sorry. I don't think there's much for me to add to that. And, yes, we do want parents or caregivers or guardians to know where their children are, to also be aware of the fact or whether or not they are carrying guns. But then in addition to that, we recognize that it's not against the law to merely be present somewhere. But with all of that said, we know that we need to increase our visibility in that part of the city. And that's what we've done. And that's why we've been able to respond to a lot of these incidences as quickly as we have been, and to make arrests when appropriate. And, our hopes are that, again, once the arrests are made, especially when we're dealing with juveniles, that the consequences are proportionate and they're swift.
I also want to just add that a lot of these shooting incidents that have happened recently have been in the presence or in the very close proximity of officers on patrol. It doesn't seem that an officer on patrol even acts as a deterrent to some of these young people. We will continue to do what we have to do to deploy our officers in the appropriate way, is the most effective way. But I still believe that from the prosecution and the court end, there needs to be punishment, there needs to be accountability, and we're hoping that that's the case.
Nos responde el alcalde de que obviamente en esta situación lo que es importante es que los padres sepan dónde se encuentran sus hijos, dónde están, a dónde van y, más importantemente, si portan un arma o si tienen un arma en la casa. Los tiempos han cambiado y lo que anteriormente hubiera sido un castigo familiar por haber hecho un acto vandálico, mucho menos aún el ser visto o el portar un arma de fuego, ha cambiado desgraciadamente. Nosotros tenemos que tratar de alentar que los padres tengan esta comunicación y este control sobre sus hijos y saber por dónde están para tomar las precauciones debidas. Nosotros contamos con una presencia policial continua y una presencia policial visible, y esa es una razón por la cual esto ha tenido una respuesta tan rápida y tan inmediata por parte de la policía de la ciudad. Esperamos también de que se dé el castigo adecuado para estas situaciones y que se den los arrestos necesarios. La gente tiene que saber dónde se encuentran sus hijos en todo momento, y especialmente después de las 10, 11, 12 de la noche. La comisionada Outlaw nos agrega de que no hay mucho que agregar realmente en esto, sencillamente de que es importante que todos aquellos que son guardianes, custodios o padres estén al tanto de las actividades de sus hijos y estén conscientes si es que ellos están portando armas de fuego. La ley actualmente se está aplicando y nosotros mantenemos una visibilidad en diferentes partes de la ciudad y especialmente en el Fashion District. Y es la razón por la cual se ha respondido tanto. Esperamos también de que se hagan responsables y se les tenga en cuenta por el sistema de justicia rápidamente tras su arresto. El arresto para los juveniles trae consecuencias y obviamente es algo que vamos a tratar de continuar haciendo, manteniendo segura la ciudad. Y el alcalde nos recuerda finalmente de que hay una presencia de oficiales en patrulla y por eso se ha respondido tanto, pero esto parece no ser un impedimento para que los juveniles estén disparando o portando armas de fuego. Obviamente, nosotros tenemos una presencia policial que se ha incrementado, pero esperamos de que los castigos que da el sistema de justicia penal sirvan de impedimento para estos actos de violencia injustificables. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, Armando. Thank you so much, Kevin. That's it.
Thanks, Isabel. We'll now go to Maggie Kent of Channel 6. Maggie Kent.
Hi, thank you for taking the time. So I'm following up on the Fashion District as well, but a larger story about retail coming back, people coming back to the offices, and the idea of safety within Center City. I know that there's a lot of people within the city who I speak to and outside as well who are scared to come back to Center City, whether it be for work or for pleasure. So what's the message there about really getting this area, which is hugely profitable for Philadelphia, back in order and safe?
I just saw a report from one of your colleagues on Channel 6 interviewing people in Center City, and every single one of them said they were thrilled to be back. They felt good coming back. They felt like they wanted to come back to restaurants and go back to work in their offices again. I understand that people have concerns as they should, but I don't think it's as bad as sometimes it's painted to be. And the more people you get that back downtown, the safer it is in numbers. And the police presence is strong. And I think we need to encourage people, not scare people into coming back into the city, as opposed to scaring them to stay home.
Mayor Kenny, both you and Commissioner Outlaw mentioned about once an arrest is made, there needs to be appropriate action taken by the district attorney's office. What's the conversations being had with the district attorney about sentencing?
He doesn't sentence. He charges. We arrest. We recommend charges. He approves the charges or disapproves the charges, and then it proceeds through the court system. And at any point in time in the court system, during preliminary hearings, charges can be lessened. Judges can change things or throw the case out altogether. So, I mean, again, we all are responsible for public safety and law enforcement and criminal justice, but there are various roles we all play. My role is to make sure we continue to recruit police officers and get our numbers up to where they need to be. The police commissioners is to deploy people in the right way and to have the right strategies. We make arrests for guns and for other things, and then it's up to the DA to charge, and then it's up to the courts to decide. So it's not just the mayor and the police department, it's every other function of the criminal justice system.
Right, but as we know, the district attorney is the top prosecutor. So what are you saying to him? And are you echoing those same sentiments to him that, you know, once these arrests are made, we need to get some serious charges here?
I've had conversations with the DA on a regular basis, and they're friendly conversations, and we talk about cases that, you know, we really want to make sure we follow through on and get the appropriate result. So and also in addition to that, have been in deep conversations with our new and terrific U.S. attorney and her staff and the FBI and the ATF, and we're all working together to determine where these cases should go. Serious cases, they've started to adopt a number of cases, the carjackings, for example, and it tends to be higher sentences and more severe time when it comes to federal crimes and federal prosecutions and convictions. So we communicate with the DA's office all the time, but in the end, there needs to be consequences for your action. If you're stealing, you're rifling through a convenience store, you need to pay some price for that if you're arrested by us. And I think that that's something we'll continue to work with the DA's office and the courts to make sure that we can get this together. We're coming out of a 2.5, 3-year pandemic where, you know, people have been affected mentally in many, many ways, both from an economic standpoint and from a social standpoint. And then we have this proliferation and crazy purchases of the number of guns that we've seen in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania over the last 2.5 years. Put all those things together, and we have work to do to get ourselves back to some normalcy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Next up, Carolina Rodriguez of Univision.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time on the question. Armando, mi pregunta es para la policía, cualquiera de los miembros que esté disponible para contestarla en referencia a los colapsos de edificios que han ocurrido y hemos reportado en el área de Kensington. Si tienen algún tipo de actualización, algún comentario que puedan compartir con nosotros.
This is a question to any of members of the police department, and this is in connection with the collapse of buildings in the Kensington area that we've reported about. Any updates in that direction?
I don't think we'd be the one to answer that.
Yeah, Armando, good afternoon. We have Commissioner of License and Inspections, Ralph D. Petro, on the line. Ralph, do you want to talk about the York Street incident? I think is the question.
Good afternoon. Absolutely. So this morning, we had a collapse of a property in the 2300 block of East York. 2329 East York was previously a 3-story mixed-use building. At the time, it was vacant, not occupied. The adjacent parcel, 2321 East York Street, was a lot that had been granted a permit, a building permit in November of 2021 to construct a new dwelling unit, a multifamily dwelling. The property, at some point this morning, the the property at 2329, the formerly vacant three-story building collapsed. We're still investigating. We have folks on site now doing some exploratory demolition work and cleanup work so we can get a better idea of what may have happened. We're investigating whether or not the work at 2331 East York Street might have played a role in that collapse. We understand the work at 2321 had been excavation and some foundation work completed. But right now, we're still in the process of looking through what's there to determine if that played a role. If any of that work that was completed, at least up until that point, played a role. Thankfully, no one was injured. As I said, both the building and the construction site next door were not occupied during the collapse. The Lindley Street property, this is 1220 Lindley. This is a very large seven-story multifamily dwelling. Again, this morning, a portion of the exterior facade peeled off and fell onto Camac Street, the adjacent street. Again, thankfully, no one was injured. We have folks on site now. The building's been evacuated, and we're doing two things. We're issuing unsafe orders for the building facade. The building owner's been directed to contract with an engineering firm. They need to come out and do an assessment of the entire building facade to determine if any other portions need to be addressed and if it's safe for occupancy. In addition, we're going to have the owner install what we call shelter platforms, basically sidewalk protection at entrances and exits in the event that any smaller pieces might come off. But for now, the building is evacuated. All our partner agencies are on site, obviously OEM and fire department, Red Cross, to see to the needs of the residents. We're going to go through the building interior to make sure that there's no fire safety issues that need to be addressed, as in addition to the exterior work that may need to take place in order to stabilize the building facade. But it's still early in the process, so we don't know. We don't have the initial evaluation from the engineer. That'll really guide whether or not the building's allowed to be reoccupied.
Can I have the address of the second building, please? The seven-story multifamily building.
The seven-story was 1220 Lindley, Lindley Avenue.
Thank you. La respuesta que nos da la ciudad es que esta mañana en el bloque 2300 de la calle York, específicamente en el 2329 de la calle York, un edificio de 3 pisos que se encontraba desocupado se desplomó. Este edificio se encuentra adyacente al 2321 de la calle York, que es un terreno que tenía un permiso para construcción que se emitió en noviembre del 2021 para una residencia multifamiliar. Este colapso se encuentra bajo investigación en este momento. Estamos explorando si la demolición que se ha dado en el 2321 puede haber tenido algún papel en este colapso. Sabemos que se hizo trabajos de excavación y se puso la base de este edificio y estamos viendo si hay algún papel en ello. Afortunadamente, nadie quedó herido, porque como he dicho, estas propiedades ambas se encontraban desocupadas. Sin embargo, tuvimos otro incidente en el 1220 de Wendling, un edificio multifamiliar de 7 pisos, y una porción de la fachada fue la que cayó hacia la calle Camac. Estamos emitiendo órdenes para que el propietario de este edificio contrate a un ingeniero para que haga una evaluación de los daños, para ver si hay alguna porción que tuviera que cancelarse o clausurarse y si está realmente seguro para la ocupancia. También estamos haciendo que se instalen unos tipos de plataforma de control en las veredas y en los ingresos para saber si es que no haya más problemas con la evacuación de este local. Podemos llamar a las diferentes agencias como la Red Cross, la Cruz Roja o las agencias de bomberos para ayudarnos de ser necesario en la evacuación, pero por el momento se está evaluando si hay seguridad en el interior del edificio. Esto es un proceso temprano, requiere el veredicto de ingenieros y estamos siguiéndolo. Gracias.
Gracias, Armando. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carolina. We will now go to Sam Searles of WHYY. Sam? Oh, she just put it in the chat because her microphone went out, so I'll read it to the group. She says, I'm wondering if Deputy Commissioner Dales or Commissioner Outlaw could speak more about the Operation Pinpoint numbers. What, in your opinion, is stopping Pinpoint from making a larger difference between last year and this year?
Well, I would say the staffing is an issue. We are still focusing on violent offenders within those zones. We're also focusing on the environment. making the necessary corrections so it won't no longer be conducive to crime. But the biggest challenge that we're facing, again, is staffing. But we are making those adjustments. We're utilizing whatever we can, whatever we have readily available to focus in on our pinpoint grids. But I will say, I mentioned earlier that we are seeing a consistent decline in shootings within those zones. Now, shootings versus homicides, there's a difference. Homicides, it depends on the marksmanship and how many rounds you're shooting at that individual. Shooting victims, it just goes to show how many shootings actually occur within those zones. So when we see less shootings, most likely that's going to affect the homicides in the long run. Again, each number, I will not ever forget that each one of those numbers is a person, is a loved one who actually perished as a result of the fact that we had a violent offender who was on the streets. And the mayor and the police commissioner constantly go over this over and over again. Due to the lack of consequences, this is why we're seeing a lot of violence going on and on and on and on within our city. And I can attest to that where you look at the offender's background. I'm not going to go into details in reference to which ones, but we know what we're talking about when we had a conversation about an individual who committed a homicide several days ago. Due to the fact that this person is a juvenile, I'm not going to go into details, but that individual had a long record and that individual should not have been on the streets. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing within these pinpoint grids.
Thank you, Deputy Dales. We also have one additional question from Sam. What is the current number of new officers the department thinks are needed?
Well, I can start here. There's no magic formula anymore. I will tell you that when I first started here, the authorized strength was 6,500. It's since been reduced to 6,380. So even getting us back to our authorized strength would give us some wiggle room in being able to be flexible in how we deploy the officers that we do have, as opposed to being reactive. During the summer, we put a contingent of officers on our recreation centers. And now that school is back in session, we've had to shift and redeploy some of those officers or, some of those assignments to our schools and our safe passages. So at least at a minimum in the short term, if we're able to get back to the numbers that we were at when I first arrived here a couple of years ago, that would give us some added flexibility.
Great, thanks, Sam. We will now go to a second round. We have a couple of minutes left. So if folks have any additional questions, please raise your hand. And we'll go to Kristen Johansson first, QOW.
I assume this would probably be for Venor. Do you guys have a motive yet for the 17-year-olds? Or even for the other shooting? I'm sorry, Mr. Ruley.
Mr. Ruley, we do not. We're still believing that someone was targeted there. We think he was mistakenly identified for someone else. We're just not sure that's a theory at this point. For the 17-year-old on Horrocks, we know she was specifically targeted by the actions taken on that video. So we don't know what the motive is yet, but we're working on trying to find that out.
Thank you. And then I just had one other question for, I guess, the mayor, the police commissioner. Has there been any discussion? You guys talk repeatedly about juveniles and juveniles being out. Has there been any discussion about issuing maybe either citations or maybe holding the parents responsible or whoever the guardians are for why their child may be out?
I know we put the curfew in place for 10. Commissioner or DC Dales, can you talk about the procedure when officers take the young people into custody?
Yes, we're talking about curfew or crimes in general?
Well, curfew, in general.
Right. So as far as the curfews are concerned, the first, if the juvenile lives nearby, the police officer will take that individual home. If their home is a distance away from where the police officer stopped that individual, that police officer has one or two choices. Either one, take them to the police station, or two, take them to the curfew center. which we prefer to take them to the curfew center, which the police district will be a last resort. We do have a policy in place where depends on what the individual was arrested for. If the individual was arrested for committing a crime and was past curfew hours, there were some consequences for the parents, I will say. But as far as curfew hours, that's the process. Any other questions that I answer your questions that pertain to the curfew policy or procedures?
When you say other violations or maybe consequences, however you worded it, what does that usually entail? Or is there a range?
Pretty much a fine, pretty much. So, but.
And so is there any other kind of discussion, the commissioner, outlaw, or mayor, that you have about maybe holding the parents responsible even for, repeat offenders?
Well, to hold the parents responsible would have to be someone other than a police officer or the mayor. It would have to be a judge or some court official that would do that. Now, back a number of years ago, we had what we called night court, which I was in city council at the time, and we worked with the municipal court to have judges sitting in police districts around the various parts around the city where the children were brought in and the parents were required to come and pick them up and have to stand in front of the judge and explain. That kind of went by the wayside because apparently the police were kind of busy to be bringing kids to the station and then rounding up the parents. I think a lot of this has to do with the personnel issues and the number of officers we actually have at the moment. But yeah, I mean, parents should be responsible for their kids. The other problem is if the parent is incapacitated in some way, either not around, in jail, or on drugs or some other substance abuse, it's hard to hold those folks accountable because probably one of the reasons why the kids out and about doing what they're doing at 2:00 in the morning.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Next up, Kelly Rule of Fox 29. Kelly?
DC Dales, I don't know if you can talk much about tactics, but when you have those extra officers down on Market Street, I know Mayor was just saying how sometimes the presence just isn't enough to deter gun violence. Is it sort of a crowd control thing to try to get kids out of the area, or what can they really do at that point?
I mean, it's challenging, like you said. Last weekend we had over 100, close to 100 juveniles downtown. Again, the commissioner mentioned there's nothing wrong with having juveniles gather as long as they're having a good time. But as soon as they decide to break the law, that's when we have to definitely get involved. I don't know if you recall during the weekend of Made in America, the police were there. They discharged a weapon in front of the police. We recovered 2 guns and locked up 2 juveniles in Center City. We also arrested 3 additional juveniles for breaking into a federal building. So it's challenging due to the fact when we have large crowds of kids and we have police officers present and they still want to commit the crimes. That's what makes it extra challenging for us. But I will say we're going to maintain our presence, our strong police presence downtown, and we will arrest individuals who decide to break the law. That's one thing that we're going to take seriously and going to continue to take seriously.
That incident you mentioned last weekend, we were talking to someone about that, and they mentioned that some officers were actually assaulted during that crowd control. Do you know anything about that?
There were some officers kids were literally, I don't want to say assaulting, but they were giving the police officers a hard time.
Physically?
Yes, physically. Yes. I will say that none of the police officers were seriously injured, I will say, but it's a challenge. And I mean, you should see how brazen the criminals are out there on the streets, how they are show lack of respect for police. Due to the fact that we are short on staffing, that's why it's important for us to at times extend tours and also hire police officers to work overtime. That's why it's very important for us to start to increase the recruitment efforts, as far as work more on our recruitment efforts to get more people on to sign up to become a Philadelphia police officer. We're going to continue to see these issues. And what's so frustrating about all this, and again, we're saying this over and over and over again, where we're doing our part, we're locking up the individuals, they have to suffer the consequences. If you want to break the crime, you want to act out of character, or you want to pretty much disrespect the city, the police department, you name it, and you get caught, you need to suffer the consequences. You got to deal with it. But we're going to continue to do our part. We're not going to stop on our end. Well, hopefully we are showing the community that the police department is serious about trying to reduce gun violence. Take a look at how many police officers were either shot or shot at within the past 2 years because they were in those zones where crime is occurring. And I want to definitely mention this one police officer in the 26th district, Officer Merrill. I don't know if you recall, the police officer who was shot in the shoulder. He actually, after he was shot, did he stop trying to go after the offender? No, he did not. He continued to pursue that offender, and he could not use his shooting arm. He could not use his weapon if that person were to fire a shot back, and if he were to shoot at him again, he was unable to use his weapon, but he still went after the individual. These are the type of police officers we have on our job who are willing to get these violent criminals off the street, no matter what it takes, and they're risking their lives to do so. So I wanted to make sure that people recognize that, and we are trying our hardest to continue to try to reduce crime. We're going to continue to do so, and we're going to continue to work with our federal partners.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Seeing no additional questions and almost at time, that concludes today's briefing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care.